what exactly is the vulnerability of South Asia with regard to climate change and its impact on rivers? See, as a region, again, it is repeated by almost all the panelists. We host almost a 1.5 billion population. And in terms of its shared history, it has a very uniqueness. And that uniqueness is not just confined to the shared history, but also in terms of its the shared as well as the varied topography, the geography, the climatic region. So the shared history and the geographical diversity gives it a unique flavor. And that unique flavor, it is definitely very relevant and important, but also is relevant in the context of its vulnerability as a region. And this vulnerability is heightened by the climate change. It's, there are multiple reflections. Some of them are projected. You can take the last floods, the devastating floods, which is seen by Pakistan, the earthquake, and also one of the reputed, the Civil Society Center for Science and Environment recently released a report in India, which highlighted a study period from January 2022 to September 2022. So the report highlighted that during this period, almost 83% of the days, which was there, I don't know exactly, around 212 days were under the study. So 83% of that, India has been faced with one or other kinds of a disaster. So this is the kind of, the future which the South Asia has. So this is all well reflected in the context of the climate change. And particularly in the context of what could be the climate change impact on the rivers. You can just the slides. Envisage establishment of a multiple regional cooperative mechanism, whether it is in the context of marine area, the coastal regulations. It also touches upon the climate change. So the point is that, yes, there are definitely the entry points to look for the regional aspects. But those kinds of a convention or a legal mechanism that may be, at least at this stage, a very, very far-fetched expectation to hope, but at least to begin with, again, as highlighted in the previous two sections, the dissemination of information and consultation could be one, specifically in the context of climate change with the changing precipitation patterns. Maybe the upper riparian states, they should be in a position to share the data on a regular basis, which can help the lower riparian state at least to take certain kind of a preventive measures in terms of the flood and other mechanism. The second could be to have a joint monitoring mechanism to study the ice melts and glacier, which is not just a bilateral one, which is having a global and actually a regional significance. So these are the points at least to begin with, and later maybe to start at the conventional level. And even when you look at the conventional level or a larger scale, as we know from a legal point of view, any kind of a project, especially involving the rivers, whether it is a hydroelectricity dam or a power project, which has a transboundary impact, needs to have to undertake an environmental impact assessment studies. This is something which is part of the international legal framework and also is part of almost all the domestic countries' jurisdictions in the world. But from the experience which Medha talked about, the integrated water management and all, it's in the context of climate. Let I take an illustration of Mahakali River. It's not enough to say that India is constructing a hydroelectricity dam, let's have a EIA on it, or India is having a dam on Kishanganga, let's have the EIA. The EIA also has to assess the cumulative impact of the multiple dam construction. So a basin approach is definitely required even at that level. So the regional cooperation definitely has to be the key if we, as a South Asian society, has to address the impact of the climate change. But this regional cooperation, that's my next point. As Medha said, should not happen only between Delhi and Islamabad or Delhi and Dhaka. That is where I think the participation aspects of the communities has to be very, very important. if I speak from a legal perspective, international law is a absolutely state-centric approach, where the states negotiate, states put up their macro concerns, certain micro concerns which affects the communities may not be part of the much of the negotiations. So it's not a defect of either like transboundary agreements which has happened. If you look at the transboundary agreements in South Asia, you can see the focus on flood management, the power generation, hydroelectricity, the major aspects. A kind of a community perspective is missing. Is it the limitations of those treaties? I won't say it is the limitation because immediately with the background of the colonization, they were concerned regarding the preservation of the sovereignty. So all the focus of the transboundary agreements was an extension to show that we are sovereign, right? So, but nevertheless, if I really analyze the transboundary treaties, it does have entry points where, especially Mahakali Treaty, does talk about a minimum flow and talk about river system and the compensation scheme in the COSI agreement. These could be entry points to bring a community participation. But as the positive aspect is that I think that's where these sort of dialogues are important, where the community participation and civil society role becomes. And we have a couple of the good initiative, whether it is Brahmaputra Samvad or Mahakali Samvad, which is eliciting some kind of a ground level participation. So I again reiterate what Medha said. We don't need to maybe to begin with look for a completely and altogether change, but even if it that particular the dialogue or a participation is actually making a difference to the communities, we need to be happy with that and provide an encouragement, multiple encouragement to that. The last point I also want to highlight is the gender participation. If I look at the scope of the convention, whether it is at the UN Watercourse Convention or at the transboundary, these are all state-centric, so the gendered aspects or community aspects are actually missing. So recently, since I'm writing on a paper, I filed an RTI with the government of India, seeking an information on all the treaties signed by India from the Indus, and wanted to find out, was there any female member who was part of that negotiations and the subsequent delegation, and if they participated, what has been their role. But my experience has been, I have not got the reply, but my experience has been positive. Initially, I filed with the Ministry of Water Affairs. In 2 days, they informed me that this matter doesn't fall under us. And on their own now, they have given the matter to the ME, the Ministry of External Affairs, so I hope to get. But what my understanding from the literature is that it was only in 2022, the first delegation, which consisted of 3 female members from India as part of the permanent Indus Water delegation. So, so this highlights that lack of gendered perspective, especially at the decision-making level. So this has to change if you have to look at the climate change and other perspective. So I just have 1 minute. I'll just wind up. The next slide, please. So what could be the legal mechanism while you're trying to address the climate change? See, the climate change as a phenomena brings uncertainty. So when we are talking about, like recent times, India has been talking about revisiting the Indus Water Treaty, and also the Ganges will be up for revision in 2026. So this is the apt time to talk about that. So, but can we actually think of a water allocation mechanism, let's say for 30 years, 40 years? I think there is a problem with that, because climate change brings that uncertainty. You cannot have a division saying that 3 rivers goes to India, 3 rivers goes to Pakistan. So you need to have a flexible allocation mechanism which takes into account the community perspective and also the changing demand. So flexible allocation mechanism has to be inbuilt, and also the flexibility in terms of changing. Now, if I look at the transboundary agreements, the amendments are a tedious, cumbersome process. So those kinds of, the rigid mechanism do not work in the face of a climate change. So I believe the policymakers will engage in a conversation and come out with much more participatory, like windows and opportunity to the community, and also to adopt a flexible mechanism. Thank you.
Dr. Jolly, very helpful guidelines to slip right into the next session, where we will definitely be taking on issues of transboundary governance, community participation, inclusion of women, and other communities. And perfectly placed to moderate that discussion is our next moderator. Ms. Lobsang Yangso is an environmental researcher whose work has brought focus on climate change in Tibet and the relationship between China and Tibet when it comes to climate. We have referred to China in the earlier sessions as the elephant in the room, so I'm not sure how far we'll go there. But we're definitely looking forward to a very interesting discussion. So with her moderation and a diverse set of panelists, we can expect a discussion on the inclusion of varied local communities in decision-making on climate change. So over to you, Ms. Yangso.
Hello. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank FNF and Dr. Carsten Klein for organizing this wonderful event and inviting people from different walks of life from 9, I think, different countries to here in Kathmandu. And so I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to share our concerns. And our panel title is called The Future of Rivers and Impact of Climate Change. And I think Dr. Stellina Jolie has already laid out the broader concepts over here, and we plan to go more detail in our panel discussion as well. So when we talk about climate change in South Asia is, as mentioned in previous panel, is expected to be hardest hit by climate change, the rapid rise of temperature, and then its impact on glaciers, and also because of the South Asia being very vulnerable to glacier melt or earthquake and flooding. So this is an issue that is facing, and South Asia also has greatest population pressure on the land in the world. And this has also placed a stress on water resource and also natural resources as well, ecosystem. So when we talk about climate change, as we discussed earlier, so South Asia, the major source of the rivers that flow in South Asia could be also glaciers. But as we say, the rise of temperature, and I would like to highlight a little bit on Tibet, because Tibet is the source of the major rivers that flow from Tibet and to its downstream countries, and almost around more than 1.4 Asian populations are dependent on the water that flows from Tibet. So that makes almost like 25% of the global population. And the major Asia's principal rivers are the Brahmaputra, Indus, Satluj, Mekong, Yangtze, and Yellow River. And so these rivers are the lifeblood of world's most populous nations like India, China, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So this will have, when there is the rise of temperature on the Tibetan plateau, and when the glacier is melting rapidly, it also has impact on rivers that flows in downstream nation as well. However, we have a very interesting panel over here, and I hope that we would be discussing more about the role of communities, especially the role of local and indigenous knowledge in terms of water resource management, and then, of course, trust, accountability, and transparency as well. I would like to invite our panelists. First, I would like to request Dr. Mahmoud Riaz on the panel. Dr. Mahmoud Riaz is the Managing Director of Geotech, and he's also a President of Maldives Coral Reef Society. So, The second panelist is Dr. Nobu Wangdula. And Dr. Nobu Wangdula is from Bhutan, and he works as a principal scientist at the Bhutan Ecological Society. The third panelist we have is Dr. Beno. And Beno serves as the UNESCO natural science specialist, and he's based in New Delhi. And last but not the least, our panelist, Ms. Bolorma. She is a country coordinator for the U.S. Forest Service International Program's Wildlife Project in Mongolia, and she is from Mongolia. So we have a very interesting panel. I hope you all will enjoy our panel. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to first remind our speakers that, as we discussed earlier, we will have 3 minutes of each in your opening remarks, and after that, we will have a Q&A discussion with the moderator, and then finally, we'll have a Q&A with from our audience, and I would request Dr. Mahmood to start with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for the FNF for inviting us for this. And I'm really happy to be here. But as this conference is about rivers and lifeline for South Asia, as a person from Maldives, first thing I just want to make note is that Maldives, we don't have any rivers. And I happened to search Google today, and I found that there are, in this world, 20 countries without any rivers. So Maldives is a very small country with very complex geography, scattered over a very long distance with small islands, consist of atolls. And as I said, there are no rivers or no mountains in our country. Our main water resource is drinking, and potable water resource is from the ground. But if you look in the broader perspective, water resource for Maldives is also the sea. So we have 99.9% sea and less than 1% land. So we have huge water resource in that sense. But for potable water, we have been using groundwater. And of course, as I said, groundwater is coming from the rainfall and percolate into the ground, and then makes a water lens in the islands. So depending on the size of the island, the water lens grows in our countries. So small islands, smaller water resources. So we have a big challenge. We have about 1,190 islands, and in that about 187 islands are inhabited. About over 200 islands are resorts. So each island itself is a like you can say, is a state itself, because we have to have all the resources in that small island. So I mean, compared to other countries here, it's very different. So in the past, we have been using groundwater as a main water resource, and rainwater harvesting has been very common in the Maldives still. But fortunately, our access to water is about over 70%, so potable water is available. So probably within the next few years, about 100% of the country will have tap water, which is now developing in the Maldives as a integrated water resource systems. which is a mix of rainwater harvesting and desalinated water, which is extremely expensive. And that's why I'm saying that seawater is a resource for us. So we have almost in all the resorts, we have desalinated water. And in the inhabited islands, the ongoing system is mixed water resource, that is desalinated water plus rainwater, and then filtration, and that is how the water is used in the Maldives. Okay. So definitely, as the topic goes on, I think we will be very much affected with the climate change. We are in the forefront. Sure. The main problem for the Maldives is the sea level rise, where what happened is that with the sea level rise, the seawater comes into the land, percolates into the land, and the water, fresh water availability decreases. So, as per the IPCC predictions, our water resource will be 11 to 36% less if the world temperature goes about 1.5 degrees.
Sure.
So,
okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think that's enough.
Yeah, we'll have more discussion.
More, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can I request?
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you, the FNF, I think, and other organizers, I think, for having me here. It's indeed a great opportunity for me to be among the eminent panelists here and then to share some experiences of water management in the context of climate change in Bhutan. I think, as everyone knows, I think Bhutan is a very small landlocked country, I think, with rich biodiversity. We have more than 71% of area under forest cover. And then, of course, more than 50% of area under protected areas. So I think a lot of, I mean, the downstream countries, you don't need to worry. I think we have made the full commitments to protect more than 50% of the areas under forest cover for all times to come. I mean, 60% of the forest covers for, I mean, that's like protecting, I mean, ensuring water security for the South Asian region. So Bhutan, I think, is playing a major role in terms of climate adaptation as well as mitigation. I think, more to say so, I mean, we are blessed with many river systems. We have 5 major rivers basins, and then the smaller 5 another small basins, which all drain to the Brahmaputra. So I mean, the lifeline is secured, at least from our part. Only 2 river systems, I think they originate from Tibet or China. And then I think most of these rivers, they are very critical for agriculture, livelihood, economy. I think most of the issues that we discussed in the earlier sessions. So Bhutan, I think, for that matter, is particularly, I think, in terms of our actions, I think, to save these critical rivers. No? And also, just to add another point, I think this is not only important for agriculture or humanity per se, but I think it's very critical for biodiversity even. I think it harbors a lot of aquatic biodiversity. We have rich wetlands, aquatic ecosystems in Bhutan also. And then just to highlight the point here, I mean, these river systems, I think in Bhutan, particularly Bhutan, Bangladesh and Myanmar, Bhutan, India and Myanmar host the very critical, endangered population, I think, to the tune of only 60 individuals in the wild. That's the most critically endangered species, the white-bellied herons, I think. And then Bhutanese river systems, they host these kind of critically endangered species, I think. No? So it's not only for humanity, but also for the whole ecological or the biodiversity and ecosystems that such kind of rivers are very critical. And then, despite the fact that I think we have made the strong commitments, I think climate change is a global issue. So our availability in terms of water availability is going to be affected because of rapid melting of glaciers. Although the glacier contribution, I think, glacier melt contribution to the rivers, I think flow is minimal at the moment. It's around estimated about 2 to 12%. And the majority of our flow is dependent on the Indian summer monsoons. But climate change is rapidly changing, and the Indian summer monsoons is also changing. So we have, very intense rainfall during the summer seasons, and then we do not hardly have any precipitation during the winter. This year, I think, for the past many years, we have been seeing very erratic climatic patterns. We do not experience snowfall in the past 1 or 2 years. And then these kind of phenomena are becoming very common, and all this would have implications on the economy as well as livelihood. And not only, this is not only the issue which is restrictive to Bhutan. I think it has a transboundary nature. So downstream communities will also be affected. So I think there are a lot of things we can discuss, but I think we have other sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Also, I would also like to thank the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung for inviting me to Nepal. Thank you very much, Carsten. I'm also very happy to be on the panel with such diverse countries here, like Maldives, which is the lowest lying country in the world, with an average height of 1.5 meter above sea level, above high tide level, and Bhutan, and Mongolia, and Tibet, China. So I'm very happy to be here. Somebody asked me this morning, what has UNESCO to do with water? Now, just for your information, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization is the lead agency of the World Water Development Report. And the 2023 report is just about to be launched. We are launching it at UNESCO New Delhi office on the 27th of March. So any one of you who would like to be present, if you are in New Delhi, you are welcome to come to the UNESCO office. Otherwise, we can also send you an invitation to participate online. In the opening statement, initially I was asked to have 5 to 10 minutes, and then later I was asked to have 3 minutes, so I'll try to stick to 3 points.
Yeah, your 1 minute is already over.
Okay, good. The issue is that glaciers get smaller because of melting ice. This means there's more water coming down the rivers, potentially increasing water levels in rivers, increasing flood frequency, enhanced water levels in glacier lakes, possibly bursting the natural or artificial water reservoirs. Downstream, in the same time, there is increased water demand based on population dynamics, behavioral changes, and industry. The Indus Delta, for example, that we talked about today, has a permanent trend of no longer receiving the same amount of fresh water due to upstream river manipulation, causing adverse impact on mangroves, fisheries, and people living in the delta. Now, once the glaciers have lost their ice, however, less water will feed the rivers. The whole situation is patchy and diverse and very difficult to predict. There are plenty of unpredictable factors, including natural and anthropogenic factors, and we have to mobilize science to look into that and to monitor it. My second point is adaptation. We have to adapt to not only to increased flooding, but also to increased droughts. I'm not the only one who mentioned that. The third point is, I know I don't have too much time, so everybody needs to learn more about climate issues. I mean, everybody, every single one of us, 8 billion people in the world. We have to become environmental stewards. There's no other way. And the sooner we realize that, and the sooner we let, in particular, the young people participate, the better it is. In the UN, we have established a climate science literacy poster series that is already available in English, in German, in Spanish, in Thai, in Laotian, in 2 languages spoken in Nepal, and there's 3 more languages spoken in Nepal coming up, and we already have 7 languages that are being spoken widely in India, and 3 more will be published. So everybody who has additional languages available, you are encouraged to volunteer for UNESCO to translate it in additional languages. Yeah, I also want to highlight that the next COP28, the climate summit, is coming up in Dubai. Now, we used to have the one in Glasgow, and then we used to have the one in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we know there is 40,000 to 45,000 people traveling there. Now, these people are traveling there mostly with aeroplanes, putting carbon dioxide into the air to discuss on how to get the carbon dioxide out of the air. It's an energy paradox. We, of course, all are using oil and gas and coal as energy, and we need to turn much quicker to renewables than we do. But let's hope that the next COP28 in November this year in Dubai will make a change. I have hope that that will allow us to turn much more from talking to much more application of available existing solutions, because we have the solutions.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to attend this important conference as a river as a lifeline for South Asia, and I would like to convey my colleague Dr. Walter's greetings to you all. I might see as the elephant in the room also because as the Mongolia, geographically, it's not in the region of South Asia, but you know, as we have this climate change issues all over the world, it's all united under this climate change. So I would like to give you brief information about the Mongolia. So as earlier in the video message that Dr. Walter mentioned that Mongolia is a landlocked country bordering with Russia and China. So, as Dr. Muhammad said that you don't have river, you have only ocean or sea, but in the reversely in Mongolia we don't have an ocean sea, we have lots of rivers, lakes, and glaciers, streams. So that's how it's showing our diverse topic will be interesting for all of you. Mongolia is also experiencing the climate change rapidly for the few decades, and it's one of the high-ranked country under the climate change impact. So when you say climate change in Mongolia, basically the countryside, herders communities highly impacted under the climate change, drought, and global warming. So I will probably give you the more information during the questioning session.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I would like to continue with our discussion. And so over here, during our expert panel discussion, ma'am has also focused on the gender and water resource and environment management. So my first question is to Ms. Bolarma. So gender when it comes to environment and also water resources, its impact is not equal. Women and children are the most who are impacted because of the climate change and water resources as well. So I mean, in the context of Mongolia, you know, how are the Mongolian policies when it comes to inclusion of women in the policy making? What are the different mechanisms where women also has an equal representation in the policy formation in Mongolia?
So in terms of the gender perspective in Mongolia, it's a very new topic as well. Just starting from late 2000s, the gender issue is introduced in all concept of the policy and regulation and also the environmental field. So as we see the role of the women and children in the water sector, they're more into the user group. So the men are mostly into the decision making and the policy making aspect as a higher level, but children and women are tend to have the water use, and then they're prone to impacted by the some of the water pollution and activities they conduct, especially in the herder communities. So mostly men are water part the water to the household, and the women and children, they make products out of the water. So And also the United Nations are, the headquarters are also introducing some of the approaches how to get the gender responsive budgeting and gender inclusiveness into the national action plans in Mongolia. So it's a very new topic, and we're still learning in terms of the gender respective in environmental fields.
Sure. I would like to continue on the same topic to all three of you. And so, Benno, when you said that UNESCO is very much actively involved in water resource management in South Asia. So, I mean, what's your observation, and how, whether there is a equal participation of women in the policy making, or how do you see that South Asian countries, or the projects that you have involved in the past with these countries, what is the status from your experience?
Well, first of all, let me inform you that UNESCO has two global overarching priorities. One of them is Africa. This is also why we have a South-South cooperation between India and Ethiopia. But the other overarching global priority is gender. We call it gender equality. Now, what we mean with that is probably equal respect, equal access to education, but also equal pay. And of course, all the genders. We cannot only talk about girls and boys and women and men. There are many more genders. Whether people like to hear that or not, there's probably 14 genders around. So they all need to have access to this, and they all need to participate. And these pressing problems that we have behind wars and armed conflicts and COVID pandemic, behind that we have climate change, which is a much bigger problem. It's not new. It's a problem that is going on since a long time, the accelerated climate issue. Pollution, including air pollution and plastic pollution, biodiversity loss. You mentioned biodiversity and how important Bhutan is for that. So if we would have mobilized all of the genders much, much earlier, like UNESCO prescribed it many, many, many years ago. I worked for UNESCO since 23 years, so that was already in the constitution of UNESCO before that. We would already have minimized these problems much, much better, because in particular, of course, the participation of women in science is also an economic factor. It will contribute to the economies of countries, and it will also contribute to the solving of problems and to find solutions for issues. One activity that we have developed at UNESCO, which is not so well known, is called the UNESCO Green Academies. So these are not eco schools or green schools where the teacher stands in front of the students and teaches them what can be done. It's actually reaching out to schools, but also other buildings, and suggesting to retrofit the school premises, the buildings, as well as the behavior of the students and the teachers, and then invite the communities to become environmental stewards. With that, soon we will have a discussion between UNESCO, UNICEF, UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, United Nations Development Programme. Sorry about the United Nations jungle, it's not my responsibility, it comes from the member states. But we will get together and try to develop these green academies more, and try to perhaps reach out to every single school in the world in the long run, to make them places where best environmental practices can be tested and applied, so that we will really all turn into environmental stewards. We probably in this room are that already to a degree, but we have to reach out to many, many more people.
Yeah, I think over here, I think you have raised a really important issue regarding environment education. And I also feel that even in school, there should be a subject, and not only the science or the geography students, but also the students from all subjects should have an environment education, and especially about their own traditional knowledge. And so I think this would be, a great takeaway from our discussion as well. So over here, so I would like to continue with the gender. So in Nepal, what is the role of, sorry, I'm so sorry, in Bhutan. So what's the role of women in environment conservation or the environment policy formation in Bhutan? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think a very pertinent issue. I mean, of course, with the institution of the democracy in Bhutan, I think it's been now almost 15, 20 years after the institution of the democracy. So, I mean, now we see a lot of participation. I think it has to do something with education, advocacy. I think participation of women, I think in terms of policy making, in terms of policy, at the national level as well as the grassroots level, I think we can see an increase in the number of women participants and in terms of local leaders or representation in the parliament. And so, I mean, the trend is increasing now. I think, of course, we have very, compared to the other gender, I think we have very less participation from women. But I mean, the trend over the years has improved, and then we can see increasing number of participation from the women. So definitely, I mean, decision-making process, I think, will be more integrated, I think inclusive in terms of gender sensitivities. And there are a lot of organizations also trying to build the capacities, so maybe something to do with that over the years, so we can see a lot of participation of gender in terms of national policy making at the national level as well as the ground level. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So I would like to continue on the same, saying that, I mean, what are the different mechanisms where, you get equal opportunity? It's not just that we see, increasing number of women participation, but what are the different mechanisms or, spaces that women have where they can show equal representation in Maldives?
Yeah, in the Maldives, actually, I must say that there is no discrimination at all. That has been from long time, even for the education. The opportunity is there. The equal pay, equal opportunities, and nowadays, I think even in the universities and schools, women are more than women. Women are more than men, and also in the especially the government, in the decision-making level, and also in the government level, women are increasing. And in very recently, we have also developed an action plan on gender inclusiveness in the climate change related things in the Maldives. So in Maldives, we have even in the ministries and in the government, I think more or less equal or more women in the Maldives. But in the community level, there might be some difference in the participation of some of the things. But mostly it's women, I think, is driving now the process, especially like in conservation. For example, in the Maldives, in the conservation sector, mostly are women. And in the environmental environmental negotiations, also women are involved. So very good. Yeah.
Good to hear that. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to mention that in UNESCO we have also produced a book recently that is called A Braided River. So and the braided river is, of course, unlike a meandering river. It's a braided river, has many obstacles and many unexpected changes taking place from the source to the deltas, like the Brahmaputra River, for example. So we use the term a braided river, the universe of Indian women in science, because like a braided river has many obstacles, so women have a lot of obstacles in participating in a scientific career. Men also, but women more so. And so we have developed that for India. Perhaps we will develop also a global version of that. So, and it's available as an open access. We also have some hard copies that we could make available to you if you come to New Delhi. You can collect hard copies because we don't have the mailing fund available. But it's available as a PDF. The Universe of Indian Women in Science. Very, very interesting because primary education, secondary education, the women are actually participating stronger than the men. And then in tertiary education, after the tertiary education is over, that's where we have a very steep drop from 52, 53% of women going down to 22 or 28%, and in other countries it's much, much steeper.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So next discussion, we would like to focus on the role of local communities or the role of indigenous community in terms of climate change preservation and water preservation and impact of climate change. And so first I would like to focus with Ms. Buloma. With the role of the nomadic pastoralists in Mongolia, so Mongolia has a very low density population, and so maybe most of its traditional communities are nomadic pastoralists. So what are the traditional practices of the Mongolian nomads in terms of adaptation to the climate change, and how has climate change impact on the the nomadic lifestyle or the grassland, and so what's their role in terms of environment protection in Mongolia?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So as I said, Mongolia compromised a large territory of 1.5 million kilometers square, and we have a low density of population comparing to the territory area. So we have only 3.3 million population in Mongolia, and 1/3 of the population comprises the herder communities in rural areas. So under the climate change, the mainly impacted communities are the herders community, and under this climate change, so their livelihood is highly dependent on the livestock and herding and grazing activities. So due to the global warming in Mongolia, it's according to the research study, it increased about 2 Celsius comparing to the 1.2. So under this climate change impact, we're facing a drought and also the harsh winter during the cold seasons. So the livestock is the main income of the herders community, and during the drought season, the animals find, in terms of the feeding and the forage, they lack in nutrition. Then in winter, when you have we have this terminology of saying the zud. So zud is, in one way, it's white and black. So the white zud is when you have a high snowfalls in winter cold seasons, and then the black one is when you don't have snow at all during the winter time. So in this regard, the grass that to feed the animals are in low stock, and recently also after the 1990, the democratic revolution took, and we come to the free market. So all the animals are ownership by the herder communities themselves. It's not like the command market anymore. So then the herders tend to increase the number of livestock. So now we have about 70 million head sheep units in Mongolia, but we're facing the grazing and pasture degradation due to the high number of livestock and climate change and low precipitation.
Okay. I think from my experience, I mean, it's very interesting and close to my heart also, because I study on the Tibetan nomads in Tibet, and because of the climate change and other human activities, Tibet's grassland are also degrading. But with the case of Tibet is that now there is this Chinese government's policy of forceful nomads relocation. And so the justification of that policy is because there is a grassland degradation, and nomads are the causes of grassland degradation on the Tibetan plateau. And so to protect the environment, that is one justification. And the second is to elevate from poverty. So these are the two different reasons that where Tibetan nomads are removed from their own grassland and then moved to big cities where they lose their livelihood, their culture. So in over here, you know, the traditional knowledge of protecting the whole grassland has completely ignored. So thus I feel that, you know, it's really much, you know, I think relevant with the study of nomads in Mongolia and how are they adapting, what would be the government policies?
In Mongolia, we have some national action plans on reducing the degradation of the pasture, and also there's a number of international and national projects implemented relevant to the pasture grazing and reducing the degradation. And also the pasture user group initiated under these action plans as well. In some area, the pasture user group is mobilizing the grazing area appropriately and keeping the number of animals based on their pasture capacity. But in a certain area where there has a lack of knowledge and some of the issues with the livelihood poverty, they tend to have a high number of animals. But from the government side, they're fostering that to reduce the number of animals, but with the high quality production, animals is the main priority for the government to foster the livelihood of the herders. And as you said that due to the climate change, it's hard for the herders to herd animals during the winter time and this hot, warm summer seasons. So in mid-90s, the migration started to tend to the city center area, and people left being herders. So this way also caused some problems nationwide, because we have almost 3.6 million people live in the city center area. So that way it also tends to increase the number of poverty nationwide as well.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So I would continue with our discussion about inclusion of local communities in the policy making. So when UNESCO has a project on the South Asian countries, how do you make sure that local communities are consulted or they are included in your policy making or policy implementation?
Yeah. It's not really UNESCO who makes sure that that is happening. It's UNESCO asking the member states that they have to make sure that that is happening. For example, in the United Nations system, we have 5 systems of nature conservation. 3 of them are being hosted by UNESCO, and I will talk about one of them a little bit more, but I just want to mention the 5. The oldest one is from 1975, the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Unfortunately, not so well known because it's the best that we have. It should be much, much better known because it's about people living in harmony with nature. That includes rivers and communities. The second oldest, of course, is very well known, is the World Heritage Convention. That includes cultural heritage. It also includes natural heritage, mixed heritage. The third one that we have in UNESCO is the network of global geoparks, very similar to biosphere reserves, but with a geological feature in it. And the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations system, they have something called Globally Important Agricultural Heritage Sites, GIAS. Not so well known, but very interesting and very valuable, also for rivers. And then, of course, we have the Ramsar Convention for wetlands. And this is not only terrestrial wetlands and rivers and ponds and lakes, it's also for the Maldives, of course, who don't have that many freshwater wetlands, as we discussed over lunch, but some I learned. But the wetlands also, the Ramsar Convention also goes down to the 6-meter bathymetric line of coastal areas. So all of your coral reefs could be Ramsar. So these sites, all of them, should be also places for community participation and to bring up the young people and everybody else to become, step by step, people who embrace these systems, to feel ownership of these systems, participate, test and apply and then replicate and demonstrate science-based best environmental practices. Yeah, so the system that we have that already is available since 1971 for relearning how to live in harmony with nature is the Biosphere Reserve, Global Network of Biosphere Reserves. The lead country in it is Spain. Spain is a country that it fits about 6 times into India, geographically, but it has 55 biosphere reserves. So that is very laudable. India has participated in the Biosphere Reserve Network since the year 2000, so since 24 years. They have established 12 UNESCO Biosphere Reserves all over India. This is very laudable, it's a good progress. Sri Lanka has participated since 1977, much earlier. Sri Lanka, of course, not such a large country like India, but equally important, of course, at least in the United Nations system, has 4 biosphere reserves. And the Maldives, very interesting. They have 3 biosphere reserves, and they have a plan, perhaps, to develop the entire country as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. That was also discussed with other countries, for example, with the state of Qatar and with other countries before. Yeah, Bangladesh has no biosphere reserve. I went to Bangladesh last month, and I talked to the Ministry of Education, which hosts the UNESCO National Commission. Would you be interested in establishing a biosphere reserve, perhaps starting with the Sundarbans, the largest mangrove forest in the world, extending from Bangladesh into India? And they said, well, why don't we make a potentiality analysis for the entire country? And of course, in UNESCO, we like that very, very much. So the federal government gets involved, the provincial government gets involved, the local government body gets involved, and the people. This is essential for these, for the community involvement is essential. Sure. So we have a dialogue with Bangladesh. I had a dialogue with Nepal yesterday, because Nepal also does not have a biosphere reserve yet, but the political will is there. And in May, maybe we can meet when I come to Bhutan. We also discussed the establishment in Bhutan of the first biosphere reserve. So these 3 countries are there. We have reached out to the Environment and Nature Conservation Committee of the German Parliament, perhaps for them to foster a north-south dialogue, in particular between Germany and India. But maybe they can also assist with their very vast knowledge, Bhutan and perhaps Bangladesh and Nepal. The gentleman from SARS and myself, we discussed it very briefly. Maybe SARS could also come in as a partner. That would be wonderful. And perhaps with the Green Climate Foundation in Korea.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I would like to move to Dr. Nubula. There is this also a research saying that only 63% of Bhutan's population has 24 hours water, access to the drinking water. And so maybe this could be also due to inappropriate, water resource management. But then when we look in Bhutan, so there must be also local people's traditional knowledge, and then also practices, and especially, the influence of the religious beliefs, and worshipping a river as a sacred river, or the mountain as a sacred mountains. So how is Bhutan, including those, traditional knowledge and practices in the water resource management?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting question. So first part, I think why we only have 63% 24/7 water supply. Of course, we have one of the most highest per capita water availability in the region. But then most of our rivers, they are at the bottom of the mountainous terrain, no? Because of the terrain, water for everybody. But because of the terrain itself, I think it makes it very difficult for, of course, like you pointed out, management is another issue. I think we need to have proper, efficient management system of water resources, or what we have. Another issue is, most of these households, they're also not in a group. Yeah? They are scattered, and then that also, I think, requires further investment in terms of infrastructures as well as. Nevertheless, I think over the past years we have, strengthened our rural water supply schemes, and then we have reached almost 92% of households. I think that's the coverage as of now. I think the rural water supply schemes. Of course, now coming to the second part, we have a long culture associated with water use. I think a lot of community-based water. Since eons, I think we have been practicing traditional water sharing mechanisms. And those, I think, experiences or associations with the culture has been integrated in the National Integrated Water Resource Management Plan. And then also, we are strengthening the community-based water resource management groups, water resource associations, water user associations. So those elements of what we have been practices, I think in terms of traditional knowledge, has been integrated into the national plans at the national level as well as at the local level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I would like to ask to Dr. Mohammed. I think over here I would like to focus on the Maldives and then UN climate change conferences. So we also have lots of UN climate conferences. So what are the positive impact that Maldives has received from these big meetings and pledges and the promises, or whether there has been any progress or positive or the negative, any impact that you see because of the conferences and UN conferences?
Yes, thank you. I think this is a very relevant question. I have a very short video. Can I show it? It's like
sure,
a two minutes.
2 minutes,
video.
not more than 2 minutes.
So that one is about the water management and water resource and climate, global climate funding source
Sure.
from
Okay.
in the Maldives. Can you please put in that video, please? Yes. Yeah.
Comes, then we'll continue with that. We'll go for the last round of our discussion, Q&A discussion, is the way forward. What's your recommendation or the solutions for the the climate change problems that we see in South Asia or even in your respective countries? So any recommendations or the solutions that you wish to address over here? Here, ma'am.
Okay, now I can, you can play that now? Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. So I would, we will go, continue with the last questions, and we don't have much time, so I would, request our panelists to be very specific and short and precise answer.
So for the last question, way forward.
Can you hear?
In my opinion, we.
I think your mic. Can you be a little louder? Yep. Okay.
Okay. For the last question, in my opinion, the way forward is we all united under the one world. So each country should follow the all integrated action plans and worldwide plans to mitigate the climate change and. So in this regard, the Mongolian president last year during the high-level meeting at UN office, he acknowledged that in order to follow the agreements such as Paris Agreement or other action plans, the Mongolia will plant 1 billion trees by 2030. So it will help the mitigate the climate change and also foster the carbon all over the world. So, so I would suggest that just following the action plans that all the world's united and approved is important to way forward to mitigate the climate change.
Sure, perfect. Thank you. So.
Yes, I try to be short. So, as Ban Ki-moon said, the former Secretary General of the UN in Rio +20, which was after 10 years after Rio +10, which was 10 years after Rio, so many conferences obviously. He said, think globally, act locally. I think this is very important, and I think we all need to walk the talk. cannot just talk about it, and those times should really be of the past. So sustainability has to be the new normal for all of us, whether it's Maldives or whether it's Mongolia or whether it's any other country really. So we need to walk the talk and have a lot of actions going on. Foundations can play a big role in it. SARS, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, but in particular the big ones, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, or the International Climate Initiative, they take ages, they take years to make decisions after scientists and professional environmentalists have submitted their proposals to them. They take ages to make a decision, and then often they make very clumsy decisions to really support financially projects that are not really helping us very much. So the foundations, and I'm not talking about the SARS of Friedrich Naumann Foundation, but the big ones, they should really support what is needed, what leads to solutions, what leads to an enhancement of the situation on the ground. In the United Nations system, we have gotten together with 10 UN agencies, spearheaded by UNESCO, to produce this climate science literacy poster series that also allows United Nations officials like myself, who don't have a background in meteorology or climatology or ecology, to understand the difference, for example, between weather and climate. Because we cannot just talk about climate without knowing the basics. We are also in process at UNESCO to produce the World Climate Education Atlas. Perhaps we are doing that with the Westermann publication house in Braunschweig.
Sure.
Perhaps with others, not yet being decided, and that will be available for free to everybody. That's why it's also a little bit expensive for us to produce it. We are also launching on the 27th of March in New Delhi a book series called the Water, Energy and Food Security Nexus in Asia Pacific, covering all 45 countries in Asia Pacific.
Wonderful.
That is available as open access, so you are welcome to send me a note. I can give you the information where you can get that available. Perhaps also you can come and collect a hard copy. And please let us establish globally more biosphere reserves. Let's follow the fantastic leadership of Spain and or some other countries, Sri Lanka, India, but the countries like Bhutan and Bangladesh and Nepal, please establish biosphere reserves, because those are the places where we can relearn how to live in harmony with nature.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, Noble.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I think the last key takeaway for the way forward would be, for Bhutan, it's very simple. Uphold our commitments that we have been making since the COP15. I think, to remain carbon neutral forever. To uphold our constitutional provisions of maintaining 60% forest cover for all times. I think that would really, secure the lifeline for the South Asia, I think, particularly, and then of course has trickling effects on the global environment. And then for the international communities, and of course foster regional cooperation in terms of scientific research on climate adaptation. I think that would go a long way in terms of helping Bhutan as a nation to upholding its commitment in terms of the climate change impacts, negotiations. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sure.
Yes, thank you. I agree with everyone what you just mentioned. That. So for the Maldives, with regard to water, I think we should follow the integrated water resource management systems that is ongoing in the Maldives. And also we should also try to build the water lands of the country, and we must have a sustainable development with integrated systems like drainage systems integrated into the water lands and things like that. So that we have to, our adaptation should be based on our local condition itself. So in that sense, building up our groundwater system is very important for us.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we have wonderful suggestions and way forward solutions to take away from our panel discussion. And I also, I think that, and like it's a wonderful that FNF organized this, and I feel that, FNF, if possible, should continue such conferences, if not once in a 1 year, maybe once in 2 years or 3 years. I think it's a great platform. And I would like to also conclude here saying that the kind of the integrated action plans are really important. Afforestation is important, and then sustainability, the role of foundations and UN system, and also climate education, literacy of climate, and then the carbon neutrality in Bhutan, and maintaining forest coverage, and then regional cooperation. I think it's really, really important in terms of joint scientific research from all the affected communities, and sustainable development in Maldives as well, and then adaptation and ground water resource management. Yeah, so I think we have come to end of our discussion, and I would request audience to ask questions, and we have half an hour for the discussion, and we will take 3 questions at a time, and I will request the audience to make your questions very short and precise and ask.
We really do apologize. We have overrun the time a little bit. That has taken the time from the panel a little bit, so sorry for that. But to hand over our token of appreciation to this panel, may I please invite Dr. Klein, Regional Director, FNF South Asia, and Ms. Nupur Hasija, Senior Program Manager, FNF South Asia, to do the honors. Yeah, I will invite you. And I will also invite Dr. Stellina Jolie to also join our panel to receive the token of appreciation up here on stage. Dr. Jolie, please. Dr. Jolie seems to be very busy resolving a law issue. Yeah, you can put it on your belt and use it for self-defense. I hope you don't ever have to use it. Ah, nice.